Well, you're going to see probably one of the world's greatest documented collections of motion picture cameras that not only tell you what films they worked on, but what cinematographers actually worked on these cameras. My purpose in this collection has always been to gather the history of these cameras, make them more than just something sitting on a shelf, you know, bring life to them.
I recently got to visit the ASC Clubhouse to chat with Steve Gaynor, a cinematographer, ASC member, and the museum curator there for the motion picture camera collection that dates back to like 1895. Now, this was a huge honor for me, not only because I'm cinematography and camera obsessed, but also because this is a private collection that only exists within the ASC Clubhouse doors. Steve graciously spent the entire day with me, sharing his wealth of information and knowledge on the technical aspects of these cameras, as well as their significant importance in film history. All right, maybe let's start there for the audience who doesn't know what the ASC Clubhouse is about. Like, what is the Clubhouse? ASC is the American Society of Cinematographers. Right. It is the designation that cinematographers have after their name for the many films.
Well, it's a society. It's a by invitation society. It's not a guild or a union. It's based on your body of work and your alliance with other members. So if you're a cinematographer that has shot some incredible films or television or commercials, then the membership gets to know you. And it takes 3 members writing a letter of recommendation to go before the membership committee. The membership committee then either approves you or not, and then it goes out to the general membership. Okay. So it's a deal to get into this. And it's a great honor to have those 3 letters after your name. Yeah. You know, it's something that I dreamed about for decades before it actually happened.
It's something that I think every cinematographer aspires to as that goal.
It really is. And every time I walk into this building, I mean, like you said, it's the temple of cinematography. Every time I walk into this building, I get a chill. Just knowing that all of these people who have been here before me and who will be here after me with such greats of cinematography and directors as well come here to visit. One of the jewels of our collection actually goes back to the very beginnings of cinematography. In the 1890s in Paris, the Lumier brothers, manufactured this camera. This is the Lumier camera. This is an actual one. And this camera was extraordinary. And then in 1894, this camera could shoot your negative. And once you process your negative, you could bipack it with print stock and make a print. And then once you'd processed your print, you could project it from this. This is, I mean, it's an all-in-one camera system. It was essentially an iPhone from 1894. Right. It's a really beautiful camera. And this camera can shoot today.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
It looks like it's in great shape.
This camera was actually in Europe was the lead for a number of years. And at a certain point, the Lumier factory, a portion of it burned. And so the Lumier brothers decided they didn't want to continue on in motion picture industry, so they sold their machinery to another set of brothers, the Patha Camera. Right. Let's go see that camera.
So a little bit of an upgrade.
Yeah, well, you know, inside, essentially, this is the Lumier camera. Okay, the same shutter, same type of gate and pull down. However, Patha has listened to the cinematographers that were out there working and made some advancements. Number one, larger magazines. Right. You could use a lot more film and shoot a lot longer. You could adjust the focus and the iris from the outside of the camera. And most importantly, the addition of this parallax viewfinder. You see, the other camera didn't have a viewfinder. Right. You had to open the back door and actually look with a ground glass through the lens in order to focus and frame. With this camera, you don't have to do all of that. You can, assuming that you understand how this works, you can utilize this viewfinder for your shooting. Now, what's great is that you have a viewfinder. What's not great is that it's simply a lens and a ground glass. So like a view camera, the image is upside down. Right. And if you pan right, you're actually going left and vice versa.
So you need to rewire your brain a little bit.
That's right. It wasn't really an issue for the people back in the early 1900s, simply because prior to this, they hadn't had a viewfinder. So this is better than nothing, right? Way better than nothing. And in fact, Billy Bitzer, D.W. Griffith's cinematographer, utilized the Patha camera and a viewfinder like this his entire career.
Even as the reflexes were changing.
That's right, even as the cameras went along and advanced. The camera that really kind of knocked a hole in this camera being the #1 camera in the world was manufactured in Chicago. Isn't that unusual? You don't think of Chicago as a hub for motion picture industry, but there were quite a few companies up in there. This is the Bell & Howell 2709. Wow. All right. Now, one immediate advantage over the Bell & Howell, over the Patha camera was that It's a metal camera, right? The Patha camera was wood, and they had some issues when they started going out into the jungles and forests, in that those wooden cameras were put together with hide glue, and bugs love eating hide glue. So there are numerous stories of cinematographers waking up the next morning of arriving in the jungle and their camera's in pieces because all the hide glue had been eaten. So metal body camera, much more resilient, right?
Yeah.
And monster advance, multi-lens turret. So it's a 4-lens turret. And what made this so fantastic is that you just have to pull out this and you can change the lenses. See, with the older Patha camera, you literally had to unscrew a lens, take the front of the camera off, unscrew a lens, and screw a new one on.
Right.
That doesn't make for fast shooting.
They didn't have PL mounts that you can just unlock quickly.
Nothing like that. This was really the advancement of the day.
Ooh, look at that.
These cameras are spectacular. They have the most precision of any motion picture camera as far as film movements go that was ever manufactured, because there were registration pins on the inside of this camera that the film was pushed onto, so in no way could it jump around or move during exposure. So this camera was purchased on November 11th, 1918 by Harry Warner of the Warner Brothers. Oh. And this camera shot their very first motion picture.
This camera right here.
This is the beginning of the Warner Brothers. Turn the crank.
Which it sounds like it's still, you know, working somewhat.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, wow.
Now, do you know the Anvil song? Dun, 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 da, dun, da,
That was their...
That's your meter to get 16 frames per second.
I was gonna ask about that. So everyone probably had a version of
They had some sort of something in their mind. 101, that works as well. And you'll notice on this camera, it also has a parallax viewfinder. Yeah. Sadly, still upside down and backwards if you're panning. However, it can focus. So you have an advancement in the process here, okay?
Just for your viewing focus. So
that's right. Well, you know, you didn't view through the camera. Yeah. These are not reflex cameras, okay? They simply, in order to view through the lens that you want to use, you have to actually move this lens. It's a bit of a trick. The lens you want to shoot, you have to put in front of this viewing tube, and you have to slide the camera over.
Oh, right.
Then you focus and frame, then you slide the camera back over, and then put the lens in front of the film. This reigned supreme, 1913 to 1920. So at the ASC at the time, they were talking about all the problems with this camera.
Which was the predominant, that was the camera that everyone was using.
This is the camera everyone, there were still Patha cameras that were floating around being used, but this is the primary camera everyone grew to love and to utilize simply because of the functions, right? But the problem with this camera is that you had to rotate, you had to focus here, so you had to slide the camera back and forth. You had to slide the matte box out. A lot of steps, and those steps are problematic. So everybody got together and they talked about what can make it better, and this one gentleman by the name of Leonard actually had developed a camera system that ended the reign of this camera. This is the camera that killed the Bell & Howell 2709. This is the Mitchell Standard. Okay, this particular Mitchell Standard is serial number 5. This was owned by Mary Pickford.
Wow.
All right. It's also a hand crank camera. Takes beautiful pictures. But what makes it so fantastic is, rather than having to move everything and slide everything and do all of that nonsense, all you really have to do in order to view is rack the camera body over from behind. So you put your viewing tube here, you can view the lens you're shooting through, and then you just slide the film back over. Rather than moving all of this, you move this. And thus was brought the end of the 2709 camera. Everyone wanted a Mitchell camera. And what you want to do is adjust the field of view, loosen that, so that you can adjust it slightly, this one too, and make it match what you see in here as far as what it's looking at.
Oh, so that's the goal here. Is sort of
that way, when you rack the camera back over, you have a reference to see what you're shooting.
Wow.
Now, another thing that Mitchell came up with that was a monster advancement, and it was actually invented by one of our members, Tony Gaudio, was right here in front of the parallax viewfinder. He put prisms to write the image.
Right, so no longer did you need to...
Problem solved, right?
Yeah. And these magazines look considerably smaller than some of the other ones.
This is a 400-footer.
Okay.
There are also 1,000-footers, right? But I want to show you something that is critically important. Okay. This is technology from 1919. Wow. Okay. That is the Mitchell camera. Turn the crank so you can see it. There you go. Go ahead. 1919, that technology developed. Check this out. Late 90s, early 2000s technology. Notice any similarities?
Why try to change something that works?
That's right. That's exactly right. This is a CineSimplex camera manufactured for 20th Century Fox. Now, Fox, William Fox, they always wanted to manufacture their own cameras, right? And as it turns out, the Mitchell Camera Company didn't think very highly of that, okay, because they pretty much copied the camera. And, you know, as we've seen the Mitchell rack-over type viewing system, that was the main point of contention. So Fox went back to the drawing board with CineSimplex and said, how can we get around this rack-over type thing? And Simplex said, well, what if you just kind of flop over? And so this does the same thing as the rack over. It moves the taking lens into the position of viewing. Here's the viewing tube here. Right. So you can view, and then when you want to shoot, you put the film up.
Wow.
And there it is. This is the ASC Death Cam.
I love this one aesthetically. It's like starting to look both like a camera, the way I imagine more modern cameras, plus
right.
it still has that old.
Yeah, well, this is a hand crank motion picture camera.
All right, so right now you are, with the speed that you are turning this, you are deciding the frame rate in which the...
That's correct. And, you know, in the early days of silent films, they shot at 16 frames per second.
And they were projected at 16 frames per second.
They were projected at 16 frames per second, but then something happened. The exhibitors thought, well, if I crank up the rheostat on the projector a little bit and say run it at 18 frames per second, I could probably get an extra show in and make more money. So they did that, and cinematographers would go to the theater and watch the show and be like, that doesn't look like I shot it. So then they'd start cranking a little faster, and the exhibitors would turn it up a little more, and then start cranking. So by the time we got to sound, which needed 24 frames per second, they were already cranking at 24 frames per second.
Okay.
This camera in particular has a very unique history. This camera was purchased in 1918 by a cinematographer who was hired to shoot an Arctic expedition, okay? They were going to shoot the indigenous peoples of the Arctic and their way of life. So they all got into a big wooden ship and they all went up to the Arctic, and at some point the ship became lodged in the ice. Well, he hopped off with his camera, backed off from the ship, and was shooting them as they were blasting the ship free of the ice when a large chunk of ice flew and hit him in the head and killed him. Jeez. While he was cranking this camera. I just think that it's very interesting to think that he went out doing what he loved.
Right.
You know, which is all that we could all hope for. Maybe not in the Arctic,
but
maybe in Southern California or some other climate that's a little better. But the Bell & Howell 2709 camera was really a great advancement in motion picture photography. This formidable beast here is the Technicolor 4 camera. It's the fourth iteration of their tries at getting true color onto the screen. So this is a 3-strip camera, okay? There are actually 3 strips of black and white film that run through this camera. Here you can see them right here. And the way that this works is there is a prism here that divides the light into the colors, okay? So you have the red and blue negative, or what's called bipacked. They run together through a gate. And on the other side, you can see back there is the green element, okay? And that runs through a gate. And the prism separates that light. Because red light is a longer waveform, it travels through the blue negative in front and goes to the back. And so these 3 negatives would then be collected out of the camera and printed individually onto a print stock. They would run the red pass, the green pass, and the blue pass. And those would all go together, not in a normal silver way like regular motion picture film, but in a dye process. They use dyes to get that color on Technicolor, and that's why it was so vibrant. And still to this day, the Technicolor prints, you can run them. They look spectacular. They don't fade.
So I think most people think of Technicolor in the Wizard of Oz context, right? The black and white to color. Where does color and Technicolor stand in the history of color film? Like,
Well, really, there were a couple of other things that I'll actually show you in a moment. Okay. There were experiments, but most of them were, in the very beginning, the Patha Camera, and we've looked at Patha cameras already, they would have a line of people with single hair brushes, and each frame under a magnifier, they would dab a little bit of green, and then it would move a little green, and the next person was doing yellow. And so they were able to make simulation of color films onto the black and white negative. After that, there were two color processes, which was split into two colors instead of three, and they didn't quite look right. They actually looked pretty crappy, if you want to know the truth. So this was really the major advancement and the huge leap for color. And one man saw this as being a way to his future and took this process and leased it for 3 years before any of the other studios could have it. And that man was Walt Disney. So he did his early color animated features in Technicolor before anyone else, and it blew minds. And that's what blew the doors open for color cinematography or feature films, was because they had already had success with the animated films, which, as you know, were shown before the movies. Yeah. So you'd see this beautiful color film and then go to a black and white, and you're like, well, the color was kind of cool, right? That's what helped break the doors down for color. And this is the very camera that did it. And this is the exact type of camera, perhaps the camera that worked on Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, The Red Shoes, all of the spectacular color films.
And you're telling me this blue finish, this is sort of their signature.
That's right. All of Technicolor stuff was painted this blue color. You know, there was a time when I got a call from someone that had a Technicolor camera that I brought here to the museum, and they said, hey, you know, we got all these old blue cases and all this blue tripods and junk. Either you come pick it up or we're going to throw it in the dumpster tomorrow. So I drove my little pickup truck over there and loaded this stuff, and this stuff weighs a ton, man. You know, the blimp, the sound blimp that goes on this weighs 600 pounds by itself without the camera on the inside. The camera weighs 180 pounds. Wow. So my truck was tilting a little bit as I drove it back over to the ASC.
So right now we're looking at it shooting as if it's MOS, which is basically the camera's loud and noisy. They're not shooting sound, but normally if they're shooting sound, there's a
huge square or rectangular, actually, blimp with glass in the front. You know, the big trouble with cameras is where the lens is mounted onto the camera, that's where the sound of this noise escapes the most. Because it's hard to go through the steel, but a lot easier to transmit through the glass.
Where the actors are actually talking. So
that's right. So you get more noise there. So that's why they had another blimp, and on the blimp there was yet another layer of glass. You know, like in a sound recording stage when they put multi-layer glass between the control booth and the actual studio.
And so I'm guessing that they would tactically undo, like the blimp was probably an operation, so they shoot all their shots in either the sound and then probably remove it to get it, I guess, more manageable.
Yeah, well, and you know, to that note, there's a lot of stories about these cameras. One really famous story is about cinematographer James Wong Howe. These cameras weigh a ton. He was doing a shot in the middle of a road in the South, and he wanted the camera higher than the tripod would allow it to be. So he looked around, and you know, there was a dirt berm on the side of the road, and he goes, let's take the camera up there, right? So all the grips and camera guys struggle and drag the thing up, and finally, after a half an hour, get it up on the top of the dirt, and he gets up there and he goes, let's put it on the ground. So there's a lot of effort that goes into moving motion picture cameras, and you know, this, for instance, it was a great innovation in motion picture technology. It's called the gearhead, right? So this allows you to pan and tilt the camera with ease. And a lot of people believe, and rightly so, I think, that these things came from anti-aircraft gun controls.
Right. Okay.
Right, because that's, if you see the films from World War I onward, they would operate the cannons with this sort of a gearhead. So they translated over into motion pictures. Maybe it went the other way. I don't know, but this was the game changer for a camera like this, because you put this on a regular tripod head, and at a certain point in the tilt, it's going to become unwieldy. Yeah. It's going to take over with gravity. Not so with a gearhead.
Yeah, I think most people in like the prosumer world are used to the more photography style tripods.
Exactly right, and rightly so, because you don't want to tote around this monster. Yeah. But in this instance, you certainly do. And I don't know, this camera, what's really neat about this camera is that the Cook Lens Company in England manufactured a custom set of lenses for each of these cameras. And this, I can show you that actually. And you can see this beautiful Cook 40mm lens that was made specifically for Technicolor cameras. Cook lenses were famous for their softness and their beauty, right? The more wide open you shoot the lenses, the more soft and bokeh they become, right? And so, I mean, look at that gorgeous piece of glass. No wonder they were able to make people look great back then. You have this and some filtration, and you're shooting movie stars.
And you said these mounts are specific. Like you can't take this Cook lens off and put it on.
Not in its present form. You'd have to have it modified.
Completely modified, right?
Yeah.
And then going back to the film strips real quick, there are 3 film rolls.
Yeah, there are 3 magazines on the inside of this camera.
And those are all feeding into this. I mean, that's a pretty complex mechanism.
Yeah, you know, machinery. And the way that they kept this thing going, because clearly it's going to take a little bit of time. There you can see one of the rolls of film right there.
Wow.
Right? There are 3 of those. So the way that it worked is that they would have 2 cameras, one on standby that was already loaded, and they would be shooting, let's say with this camera, they would roll out of the film and quickly swap this camera for the one that was already loaded and then reload the other one. So that's what happened with the Technicolor camera. You know, and this look carried on for years, and frankly, their print stock with the dies actually survived a lot longer than the camera systems did, because it was cheaper to do a dye process print than it was to do a silver-based print, like an Eastman Kodak is a silver print, right? This is dye print. And these last a very, very long time.
I was going to say, for archival purposes, these will last longer than
Absolutely.
Oh, very cool.
Well over 100 years. This is a Stein 2-color camera system. Now, this is an early color system that was utilized by Fox that was also called the Fox Nature Color System. And it was good, but not great. Certainly not anywhere in the neighborhood of what the Technicolor 3-strip camera was able to do. And the way that this worked is there are, as you can see here, each lens has 2 elements. And it would expose 2 frames at once, one red and one green. Oh. Okay? And those 2 frames were butted right as close to each other as possible, for the very reason that because the film is moving and because the subject is possibly moving, there is a small amount of time that elapses between each frame. So you could get a blur because the 2 have to be combined together for color.
Interesting.
If each one of them weren't exactly the same, that's why they had them as close together as possible. So there are a lot of things that were not super fantastic about this. It was a great idea, but in the end, it failed because the color just wasn't enough to keep people interested. Right. You know, skin tones. It's all about skin tones and the reproduction of skin tones. And this is something that just didn't quite make it.
So this was trying to evolve the Technicolor to make the color
This is in between black and white and Technicolor.
So it wasn't used that long, I guess.
No, it was only used for a year or 2, and then it was obsolete. You know, the cameras are bigger. Black and white photography, you know, stayed around for a very long time, right? So throughout all of these shenanigans where people were trying to get color images properly, the black and white was a consistent. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, in latter years, once the Technicolor had actually established itself, you find that there was the Academy Awards. They would have Academy Award for cinematography, black and white cinematography, and for color cinematography.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah. So, and as a matter of fact, I think a couple of those hotshot ASC guys were actually nominated for the same year for black and white and color. This is a rack-over camera system. You know, as we discussed earlier about the Mitchell cameras and how the rack-over system allowed them to take over Hollywood, it allows you to view through your taking lens, and once you framed and got everything in focus, then you rack the camera over to put the film in front of the taking lens. And then you're looking through this parallax viewfinder, right? The parallax viewfinder running side by side and on the same plane, theoretically. I love this little thing. Some genius came up with the idea of this guy so that you could open the camera. Right. There we go. And here you can see
that's beautiful.
The amazing, yeah, you see, there was a lot of detail taken in the early days of cinema. Much as the automobile industry had, you know, like dashboards that had what this is called engine turning. Okay. Right? And there were a number of ways to do that. It's a burnishing technique. But what one guy told me is that they had drill presses, and they would put pencils on the drill press, and the eraser just spinning on the steel would create a pattern like that.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and they just, you know, would move it, and just have it on a table that moved. Well, yeah, you see there are two lenses for each housing.
Those look like they are permanently attached to this turret.
Yeah, essentially what you would do in a normal shooting situation is your lenses normally in motion picture ran from 35 to 100. So maybe 35, 50, 75, and 100 millimeter. 35 handling most of your wide stuff. If you needed something wider, you might have to take it off. But in order to ensure that the flange distance was perfect and that everything was going to be in focus, they screwed these things on. And man, these things have a lot of screws on them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on each lens. Wow. I don't think it's going anywhere. Yeah, that certainly ensures, though, if an assistant is focusing and changing things, that the lens is not going to get turned a little bit. Earlier lenses screwed into the camera bodies. Right. There's probably room for failure there. Yeah. If the lens comes out one turn of through a screw thread, your back focus is out.
Right, because the plane to the film and the camera rear element, they need to be precise.
They have to be. Make sure that's everything. Yeah. You know.
As camera operators or ACs, new cameras come out in our modern age, and they're like just versions of their last camera, right? And so an AC or a camera operator will be able to jump into that camera and kind of understand it quickly. Like, what's that? I guess my question is, what's that climate like for camera ops and ACs when all these different mechanisms are coming to them? Like, is there one camera operator who's really good with this? Well, that's
a very good question, actually. A prime example of that would be the Akeley pancake camera. Okay, Carl Ethan Akeley was a naturist who went to the darkest jungles of Africa in order to film the wildlife, and he ended up with a Bell & Howell 2709 camera, which had the old style gear head, and you have to turn it 30 times to move this much of a distance. And so if a lion ran by, he's gone, So he was very frustrated. So he came home and he said, this old system does not work for me. I need to figure out a new system. And he actually designed a gyroscopically controlled pan and tilt system, which allowed him to easily follow the motion of something quickly. And also, instead of having the parallax viewfinder this far off of the taking lens, he invented a 2-lens system that had a built-in parallax viewfinder right next to the actual taking lens. So he was able to use very long lenses in addition to this thing, and really, because shooting a lion, you probably want to use a longer lens, right? I don't want a 25 millimeter. I want a 500 millimeter. So he developed that Akeley camera system, and what happened in Hollywood is that the guys who were shooting aerials, right, flying in a biplane and trying to follow another biplane, they found the Akeley perfect for that because they could pan and tilt as they wanted to. They didn't have to deal with this nonsense. So they became Akeley cameramen. Okay. That was their deal. It's like a designation. Right? So the answer is yes. Plus, just like today, probably in any industry, but especially in the motion picture industry, if you are a person who shoots a comedy, and it's a big success, the whole industry thinks of you as being a comedy cameraman, right? You can't do it. You can't do drama. You can't do action. There's no way. And that works for any of those fields. If you do an action movie, they're not going to ask you to do a beautiful rom-com, right? So that sort of stuff happened back then, and the guys who shot color movies, like a very famous cinematographer named Ray Renahan, became famous for shooting Technicolor movies, right? And that was he was pigeonholed in that arena.
So the pigeonhole was like a technical pigeonhole.
That's
as opposed to like the genre.
If you still today, if you have success in any given area of the motion picture industry, you're thought of as that sort of a person. Wow. Yeah, and it's foolish, but that's just the reality of it.
100 years ago, it was still happening.
The industry is so much like it was back then. I study the past. The same discussions, the same arguments are happening today. Wow. How can we make it faster and cheaper?
So that's a look at some of the earliest motion picture film cameras. In part 2 of the series, we'll be diving into the world of large format, specialty formats, and the early anamorphic lens adapters. We'll see you then.